very great pleasure to introduce one of the original 5 wise men who started the Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration here in Leicester back in 2001. And I think that Aubrey has spoken at every event, even during the pandemic when we did it online. So we can get away with it. And one of those 5 wise men was, of course, the late Paul Winston, who we honoured with the competition that he just said. Aubrey was one of the person who actually founded the Bergen-Belsen Centre for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Leicester. He was the first director and has been intimately involved with the Bergen-Belsen Centre. I'm pleased to see we have the present director, and the previous director as well here this evening. I don't think Aubrey needs any introduction. It gives me great pleasure to invite Aubrey to deliver this keynote address on the theme.
I hope you'll forgive me for sitting down. The spirit is willing, but I fear the knee joints are not up to it. For more than 20 years, we in Leicester have been marking Holocaust Memorial Day, remembering the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews, representing 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, alongside the deaths of millions of others perpetrated by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. And on these occasions I have had the honour of saying a few words to explain the significance of the day and what lessons can be learnt from that remembrance. Originally, the focus of Holocaust commemoration concentrated on the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. But nowadays, attention is more concerned with the events associated with the system of death camps established in Eastern Europe. And on the 60th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps and the conclusion of the Holocaust. As time went on, the scope of this commemoration has been extended even further to other cases of genocide all over the world. But at its heart in this country has been the opportunity of allowing the survivors of the horrors of these camps to testify. Above all, to bring home to those who have not experienced the horrors directly that they had experienced. Obviously, my generation is hardly likely to forget the pictures that came out in our youth, the newsreels in the local cinema, the headlines in the press. Now we know what we have been fighting against. It is now 80 years since these camps were liberated and the survivors were rescued. And inevitably, time has laid its toll on them. And as Holocaust survivors become fewer, an urgent question comes into focus. How do we remember those who were murdered when living witnesses are no longer with us? And while we have tried to involve the coming generations in the process of understanding these events, we must find a new approach to the background theme of never again. But we have further problems at the level of education as part of the Holocaust education in schools. 3 years ago, it's been estimated, over 2,000 schools in the United Kingdom especially marked Holocaust Memorial Day. Last year, it was approximately 854. It is shocking that among young people who have studied the Holocaust, only 37% know what the term antisemitism means, and that 10% only believe that fewer than 100,000 Jewish lives were lost. We have to recognize that new forms of attack have developed. Two factors are involved, and one of them undoubtedly has been the Gaza situation, which has had a polarizing impact in the United Kingdom and even made the commemoration of the Holocaust seem controversial. In some circles, an anti-Israel sentiment, sometimes shading into outright anti-Semitism, has made objective teaching about the Holocaust unlikely. Such new ideas include distorting historical truths about the Holocaust, trivializing the word Holocaust by applying it to causes such as animal rights, or even denying it ever happened. Recently, the Shadow Minister of Education urged the Education Secretary to get a grip on extremism and anti-Semitism. He said it is imperative that schools across the country mark Holocaust Memorial Day and learn about one of the darkest chapters in human history. And as we see anti-Semitism on the rise in our streets, not long after one of the worst and most repulsive attacks on the British Jewish community in Manchester, it is more important than ever to bring the country together to understand where division and hatred could lead us, especially in our schools. I quote, "United Kingdom government needs to urgently get a grip on the extremism and anti-Semitism which has become too common in our education sector, and ensure our school leaders are prepared to ensure that we learn the present lessons from the past and never allow Jews or anyone to be persecuted for their religious beliefs." Another educator said, "The sharp decline in the number of schools marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day should be a cause for concern for every British citizen, not just the Jewish community. This day reminds us of what happened when hatred and indifference are left unchallenged. We have a collective responsibility to remember and to ensure that our education system continues to honour and teach this history. We now have also an added task of affirming that these events actually happened. Over the past years, there has emerged the so-called hoax of the Holocaust, the false claim that Nazi Germany did not commit genocide against approximately 6 million Jews during World War II. These denials attempt to negate or minimize the established facts of the Nazi genocide. The deniers make several false assertions. They claim that survivor testimonies were coerced or lies, that captured Nazi documents were forged, and that the photos and films of atrocities were staged by the Allies. They assert that the extermination camps and gas chambers were not used for mass murder, but rather for purposes like delousing or as air raid shelters. They argue that the accepted figure of 6 million Jews murdered is grossly exaggerated, and that any deaths that occurred were due to disease or starvation, not systematic extermination. In fact, there is a vast array of evidence. There are thousands of internal German documents, including blueprints of gas chambers, orders for construction materials, and detailed reports from mobile killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen. They detail the systematic process of the final solution. There are first-hand accounts from survivors, camp functionaries, and liberating Allied soldiers, many of whom described the horrors they witnessed. Nazi rulers such as Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, and Adolf Eichmann have confessed in detail to their roles in the mass murder programs during post-war trials. And I'm told that if you go to Moscow and get into the Soviet government archives, you will find there something like 2 miles of shelving containing material lifted directly from German central headquarters relating to aspects of the Holocaust. The so-called myth of the Holocaust has also been involved with the statement often made that the bodies were not burnt, but instead the corpses were rendered down into fat, and that fat was used to make soap. That rumour was widely circulated and published as a fact in numerous books and newspapers after the war. So but the myth of fat burning down has been debunked for many decades. Historians such as Deborah Lipstadt have frequently stated it is a fact that the Nazis never used the bodies of fat of Jews, or for that matter anyone else, for the production of soap. But the soap rumour, however, was thoroughly investigated after the war and proved to be untrue. Despite this, many believers of such myths persist, and they are wittingly or unwittingly playing into the hands of Holocaust deniers by giving them an easy chance to debunk that particular legend and allowing them to cast doubt upon the veracity of the entire Holocaust as such. Last year I said that there are ways we can understand and learn what happened. That way is to visit the camps, to look at the fields of grey ash around the camps and realize they are the relics of the ovens, to look at what we might have thought were the shower heads for cleaning for those who passed through these chambers, and really realize that they were outlets for the Zyklon B gas, which killed those who had been packed into these rooms. To look at the grave mounds in other camps, such as Belsen, and read the notice beside them, "Here lie 1,000 dead." Belsen was not one of the organized death camps, and it was certainly not the first to be overrun by the Allies. But it was the first camp reached by Western journalists, and this made the accounts far more important. One of the most prominent of the Allied reporters was Richard Dimbleby. In April 1945, as the BBC's war correspondent in the field, he accompanied the British 11th Armoured Division to the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and from there made one of the first reports. His description of what he saw there was so graphic, the BBC declined to broadcast its dispatch for 4 days, relenting only when he threatened to resign, and eventually an edited version was aired. I quote, "I passed through the barrier and found myself in the world of a nightmare. Dead bodies, some of them in decay, lay strewn about the road and along the rutted tracks. Inside the huts, it was even worse. I've seen many terrible sights in the last 5 years, but nothing approaching the dreadful interior of this hut at Belsen. The dead and the dying lay close together. I picked my way over corpse after corpse in the gloom, until I heard a voice that rose above the gentle, undulating moaning. I found a girl. She was a living skeleton. Impossible to gauge her age, for she had practically no hair left on her head, and her face was only a yellow parchment sheet with 2 holes in it for eyes. Babies were born at Belsen. Some of them were shrunken, wizened little things. that could not live because their mothers could not feed them. One woman, distraught to the point of madness, flung herself at a British soldier who was on guard in the camp on the night that it was reached by the 11th Armoured Division. She begged him to give her some milk for the tiny baby she held in her arms. She laid the mite on the ground, threw herself at the sentry's feet, and kissed his boots. And when in his distress, he extended his arm to get up, she put the baby in his arms and ran off crying she would find milk for it because there was no milk in her breast. And when the soldier opened the bundle of rags with the child, he found that it had been dead for days. I have never seen British soldiers so moved to cold fury as the men who opened the Bergen-Belsen camp this week, and those of the police and the RAMC who are now on duty there trying to save the prisoners who are not too far gone in starvation. It was not only the spoken testimony that was significant. During and immediately after World War II, newsreels have become a powerful medium for mass communication, reaching audiences in cinemas across Europe and North America. Footage from Bergen-Belsen showing mass graves, skeletal survivors, destroyed barracks, was often streamed before feature films, confronting viewers with the stark reality of the Holocaust. For many, these moving images were the first direct encounter with the scale and brutality of Nazi atrocities. The visual and emotional impact went far beyond what written reports could convey, making the horror tangible and immediate. Government departments supported the wide distribution of such footage to counter denial, promote understanding, and emphasize the necessity of justice and accountability. These newsreels played a crucial role in shaping global memory. Bergen-Belsen became more than a historical site. It emerged as a symbol of the consequences of unchecked hatred, dehumanization, and totalitarian power. By bringing the realities of the camp to international attention, the footage helped ensure that the suffering of its victims could not be ignored, forgotten, or minimized, embedding the lessons of Bergen-Belsen into collective consciousness for generations to come. But as the chairman of the Yad Vashem the conference said at a recent conference, memory does not sustain itself. Remembrance is not automatic. It depends on conscious transmission, on future generations choosing to carry it forward. That insight speaks directly to the crossroads we have reached in Holocaust remembrance. We are no longer witnesses to living memory. We are becoming its custodians. How should we teach about the Holocaust today? In some classrooms, the decision to address this subject no longer seems obvious. And what seemed a natural part of the curriculum can now provoke tension and even lead to accusations against Jews or against non-Jewish teachers who are perceived as such merely because they intended to teach this history. And beyond that, rising anti-Semitism prompts some to ask an even starker question. Should we continue teaching about the Shoah at all, if all the world appears not to have learned from it? The answer, of course, is yes. Holocaust education is more relevant than ever. We see in recent events how anti-Semitism spreads, how easily it takes hold of societies, and the clear link to the denial or distortion of history. How our personal stories about the Holocaust a pathway to relevance. Personal human stories will always matter. When approached thoughtfully and authentically, human dilemmas, explored through an empathetic lens, enable deep moral reflection. Such dilemmas touch on fundamental questions of identity, belonging, responsibility, meaning, allowing learners to relate without resorting to simplistic comparisons, simulations, or shortcuts. While the numbers of living witnesses to the Holocaust sadly dwindle, their experiences remain powerful platforms for education and challenging generations to come. Some of you may have seen on the television today the program being instituted by the Holocaust Education Trust of interviewing survivors, creating a large bank of question and answer sessions through artificial intelligence. How far that could take students, I don't know. But what I do know is that here in Leicester, Leicester University, with the Stanley Burton Centre for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at its centre, we are actively pursuing the continuing need to teach students the facts about the Holocaust and to research further aspects. Mr. Chairman, guests, we have been told over and over again that the lessons of Auschwitz must never be forgotten. Here in Europe, 80 years after the end of the Holocaust, societies seem increasingly divided. There is a rise in support for political parties, often but not exclusively on the far right and far left, that are quick to point at the other, the outsider, the unwanted, be they migrants, Muslims, LGBTQ plus people, or Jews. I want everyone to live together, Jewish, Catholic, black, white, or whatever, says Eva Umlauf, a Holocaust survivor who has made a great impression on the German teenagers. She describes the Holocaust as a warning of what could happen when prejudice takes over. That, she says, is why I dedicate my time to talking. Now in her 80s, she was the youngest inmate to be freed from Auschwitz 8 decades ago. Another warning comes from the chief executive of European rabbis. The neglecting of minorities is now becoming again mainstream. The Muslim community, he says, is bearing the brunt right now, also describing himself as shocked at the levels of anti-Semitism he sees. He thinks 80 years on from World War II, some are intentionally choosing to leave the Holocaust and the responsibility to learn from it in the past. Can we risk forgetting where prejudice and persecution can ultimately lead when normalized and actively encouraged? By understanding the steps that led to the unique and extraordinary tragedy of the Holocaust and other genocides as well, we equip ourselves with the knowledge necessary to identify and challenge similar threats in the present and future. Anti-Semitism and other forms of prejudice have not vanished with the passage of time. The next 50 years will see enormous strains in our society. Housing, medical services, education will all face tremendous problems. And if society is to meet them properly, the first thing we need to do is to beware of prejudice and discrimination. Differences of religion, differences of colours of skin, differences of origin should all be recognised as basically irrelevant. We should not be going to the camps as tourists out of curiosity. We should go determined to understand how discrimination and prejudice lead inevitably to persecution and destruction. We are often told that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The last thing that we as a society want is to repeat the horrors that culminated over 80 years ago in Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. Thank you.
Aubrey, as always, we're very honoured to have such a distinguished Holocaust scholar to speak to us, and what a moving and excellent presentation.